Good evening. My name is Ann Joint, and I'm the president of the UB Law Alumni Association. Thank you all for joining us this evening for this presentation by Paulette Brown, who will be speaking to us regarding how law firms can hire and retain diverse attorneys. We are thrilled to offer this program in concert with the Bar Association of Erie County, the Women's Bar Association, Western New York chapter, and the Minority Bar Association. For the law alumni, this program came from our newly constituted Committee on Social Justice and Racial Equity, and we will be endeavoring to present programming such as this throughout the coming year. It is my honor now to introduce Dean Aviva Abramofsky. She is the 19th permanent dean at UB School of Law and the first woman to hold this prestigious position. In this role, she has been a staunch ally in the continuing fight for social justice and racial equity. We also thank her particularly for her strong leadership during the pandemic, where she has risen to the challenge spectacularly and helped our students continue to thrive at our law school. Dean Abramofsky.
Thank you, Ann, for inviting me to participate. And thank you to the Law Alumni Association for taking the lead in organizing programs on these critical topics. I'm grateful to Ann Joint and the Law Alumni Association for their steady support of our initiatives. I know I can always count on you, and I'm very pleased to be here for such an important meeting, and I plan on learning a lot. I am pleased and honored to have the opportunity to introduce our special guest this evening, Paulette Brown, a national expert on diversity issues in law firms and legal practice. Paulette is a senior partner and the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Locke Lord in the New York City and Princeton, New Jersey offices. She's a member of the firm's Labor and Employment Practice Group. She has held a number of prior positions, including in-house counsel to several Fortune 500 companies and as a municipal judge in New Jersey. She's a former president of the National Bar Association, and she's the first woman of color to serve as the president of the American Bar Association. She has been recognized by the National Law Journal as one of the 50 most influential minority lawyers in America. And she recently co-authored an American Bar Association study titled Left Out and Left Behind: The Hurdles, Hassles, and Heartaches of Achieving Long-Term Careers for Women of Color. We are fortunate to have her here today to provide us with guidance on how to hire and retain diverse lawyers. But first, before we move to our featured speaker, I'm going to turn the camera over to Tolu Odunsi, the law school's Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Tolu has been working tirelessly for our DI initiatives since she took on the role last year, and we all truly appreciate what she has already accomplished in such a short and often very difficult period of time. I also want to encourage everyone who's joining with us to please feel free to reach out to the University at Buffalo School of Law. We have many students who are eager to begin this journey on their track, and we're happy to put you in contact with them. So now I will turn it over to Assistant Dean Odunsi to give you some brief instructions for the evening's presentation. Thank you, Tolu. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Paulette. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Dean Abramofsky. Just a couple of housekeeping things before our illustrious speaker begins. So we are going to, because of the number of people on this Zoom, hold all questions until Paulette is done speaking. And in doing so, we ask that you privately message me your questions using the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. So if you click on the chat, you are able to scroll to my name, type your question, and send it to me privately. Because we have so many people, I will go through the questions and try to pull as many as possible so that Paulette can answer those for you. So thanks again for joining us. And at this time, I will turn it over to Paulette Brown.
Thank you very much, Tolu, and thank you, Buffalo alumni, law school alumni, for having me this evening. And thank you, Dean Fleshman, and again, Dean Tolu, and to my law partner, Simon Fleshman, who introduced me to all of you. I am really pleased to be here with you this evening and to talk to you a little bit about the hiring and retention of diverse lawyers. It is something that we have grappled with for an extended period of time. So I want to, talk to you a little bit about that this evening and welcome any questions that you may have. Brandon, Brandon, next. So we want to talk about what are some of the barriers to the hiring and retention, because, you know, all of us are talking about it. And you know, what is it that is really keeping us from doing this? Okay, we can go to the next slide. So, you know, so when we think about, you know, why now? Why is there a heightened interest in increasing our diverse lawyers in our firms, in our corporations, in our law schools, and in all legal environments? And so, you know, I think that there has been a heightened awareness that has happened. And, you know, a number of different reports like like the ABA has produced and others have produced, but also COVID-19. When we begin a shutdown period in COVID-19, a lot of things came to light. A lot of things came to light with regard to women and the additional stresses that are placed on them in the workplace. And a lot of concern has been generated as to how we're going to keep these women, because they are trying to do homeschooling, they're doing all of the things, and they have to keep up with their billable hours. And we also think about what has happened with regard to race relationships in the country with George Floyd, who I've maintained is the tip of the iceberg, that these are things that have been happening for quite some period of time, and then Breonna Taylor. And then how does that sort of dovetail? So I think it's my personal opinion that a lot of these things were brought to light because we were in lockdown because of COVID-19. And so people had an opportunity to focus more on some of the things that they were not able to do because of various other distractions. So I think that in addition to the fact that there's a heightened awareness of, one, that we live in a far more diverse society, and that those of us who work in law firms, that our clients are requiring more diverse people, more women, to be a part of our matters and to get credit for our matters, and to ensure that people who are of diverse backgrounds are successful in law firms. And you can't have success if you don't have people who are willing to stay at your law firm. So, you know, we have to think about, before I think we can make any kind of change, we have to understand how we got to this point. And we have to go back and look at not just our past practices and the way that we've done things, take a really close look at it, but we also have to look at the structures that are in place and what has created these structures, and the fact that these structures have been building and have been in place really for the last 400 years, especially as it relates to Black people and people of African descent. And so that as a result of the structure, you almost have to sort of tear down the structure and make some systemic change. You know, not using the Band-Aid effect of like, we're going to do this one thing now. There are multiple things that I believe that have to be done sort of simultaneously and in tandem in order for there to be real change, so that we won't come back 5 years from now and we're talking about the same thing. And I really think that the time is now, that people are far more receptive to making real change than they have in the past. And as I mentioned earlier, before everyone joined the call, I am the eternal optimist. And I believe that real change and systemic change can really happen. But in order to do that, there's a need for education, a deep dive into education to find out what our actual history is. And, you know, some of the myths, you know, we need a lot of myth busters. And, you know, education of understanding of what keeps us from getting to where it is that we want to be. And I like to say education as opposed to training, because education is an ongoing process. And even when you talk about issues such as this, the research shows that when you talk about matters relating to diversity and inclusion, that because of our busy schedules and all the other things that we have to concern ourselves with, we only retain this type of information for about 4 months. So it is an ongoing process. The education has to be ongoing. We have to continuously learn. And I will tell you that I am continuously learning, that there are things that since George Floyd, I have read more than I've ever read before, and I am learning more things as well. And so there's certain things that we have been taught over a period of time. There's certain societal beliefs that have occurred as a result of media influence, and just because of that's the way that we've done things for so long, and it doesn't seem to be broken, so why should we fix it? But, you know, fortunately, there is a new awakening that's going on that will enable us to really turn our thoughts and our intentions into real action. So thank you, Brandon. So, you know, why it's important, you know, there has been overall a deprivation of history for all of us. And, you know, we think about what is comfortable for us or what it is that we think we know. But in order to understand and for us to do better, we have to understand what the complete history is of all of the people who we interface with every day and who are a part of our society. And when we have to understand that everybody is entitled to be treated equitably, and that equity produces positive results. So we want to understand the difference between equality and equity. So, you know, so you see the little picture here, the picture on my left is what equality is. Everybody can go to the ball game, but when you have equity, everybody can actually see and participate in the ball game. So there is a difference. It's not just creating the environment, it's actually executing and making sure that not only is it equal, but it's also everybody is really being treated the same and given the same opportunities. Okay, we can go to the next one. So I've got a few objectives here, which some of you may already be familiar with. And so, you know, but I don't think that there's any problem in going through some of the things that we've heard before. But we want to better understand the structure of how we got here, the tools, some of the tools, not all of them, that are necessary to make some systemic change and better understand the barriers preventing us to doing better. So, you know, we have to, again, as I mentioned before, think about the historical perspective. You know, there've been a lot of things that have been mistaught. We have had things that I refer to as revisionist history. We don't remember things exactly the way they were, but the way that we want to remember them. And then there are things that have been mischaracterized about people. You know, sometimes we take out what we think should be so rather than what is so, based on what it is we've been taught and what it is that's been placed into our brains over a period of time. And so sometimes, you know, we sanitize history so that it fits to whatever our liking is. And then sometimes we become sentimental about things, the way things were, and, you know, and so it keeps us from moving towards where we want to be. So next slide, please. So this is just a little cartoon. History is fiction we invent to persuade ourselves that events are knowable and that life has order and direction. So, you know, we know that life doesn't have a lot of order and direction these days, but we're going to move on. So there is an agenda, some of the things that I want to cover with you, you know, the issue, you know, and the issue obviously is, you know, how do we hire more diverse lawyers, and how, more importantly, once they get there, what do we need to do to retain them? So in order to get to that, before we get to that, I think we need to talk about what some of the barriers are and what some of the impacts of the barriers are, and understanding that you have to know certain things before you make decisions. want to talk about what has changed over time. If anything, want to talk a little bit about current statistics, which some of you may already know, bias manifestations, and some tools for interrupting bias, because you have to be able to interrupt some of the biases to move from intent to action. And then what's the way forward? What can I do as an individual, and what can be done collectively within our organizations? So no, you can hold that one for later. So now you can, we don't have to screen share anymore. So I just want to talk to you about a little while about some of the things that I think are some of the barriers to what it is we do, and why it is that we can't really move as quickly and as efficiently as we would like with regard to our hiring and retention. So we look first at our own culture and our own background when we start to make decisions. And when we do that, sometimes that causes blind spots. So, you know, it's the same thing, you know, we expect to see certain things. And so when we expect to see certain things, that's what it is we see. But we know that we have to look deeper into something, so that if you really want to make the right decision about something, it's the same as if you're driving your car. You're driving down the whole highway, and unless you have one of those really fancy cars that will tell you when somebody's in your blind spot that goes beep, 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 then if you don't turn around and look to get that extra information to see whether somebody else is to your left or to your right, then you won't have enough information, and you're going to make a bad decision, and you're likely going to get into an accident. And so the same thing happens when you're thinking about hiring someone. You know, have I gotten all the information? And when I look at somebody, when they first walk into the room, within that first 10 seconds, am I making certain decisions about them without getting all the information that I need? And sometimes when we allow those blind spots to occur, we lose out on some of the best candidates that we can have. And then, you know, we have to think about stereotypes. You know, there are certain stereotypes that we think about, and sometimes stereotypes can be perceived as being positive and or negative. But when we think about stereotypes, to me, they can never end up in a really great result. So sometimes, you know, when we think about stereotypes, you know, it's preconceived thoughts or notions about particular groups of people or things. And so usually they're exaggerated or oversimplified. So sometimes we think about, you know, examples of stereotypes is that Asians have better math and science capabilities. And so when we think about that, and if you have an intellectual property group, when you think about that, you will think about people having those types of capabilities and who would be best suited for that particular practice group, without considering the fact that there could be others who would do just as well. And in fact, you consider the fact that maybe not all Asians do well in math and science, and therefore don't make the best, for example, IP lawyers. And then you think about women being warm and engaging, and maybe they should be steered to a practice group like labor and employment, when that may not necessarily be their interest. Or you think about Black people being aggressive, and they should be steered towards the litigation department. But even if you think you are thinking that you are having a positive reaction to a particular person, it's not necessarily the truth, and it could end up being a negative, because that may not be where the best person is best suited. And so it's important to dig deeper to find out more information so that you can make the best possible decision. And so we should, you know, and stereotypes can be a lot more than that, but I wanted to just give some of what sometimes people can perceive as positive stereotypes, because even those can prevent you from hiring someone, and it can definitely prevent you from retaining someone. If someone is not in the group where they actually belong, you have certain expectations of them because this is where you think they should fit. And they don't fit in that, and so then they're not going to succeed. And they will either leave voluntarily, or they will leave because you have asked them to do so. One of the other things that we hear a lot of talk about which causes us not to do as well as we should, is implicit bias. So that's when our brain tells us to do something without giving us any warning or notice that it wants us to do that. And so as a result of that, we make snap decisions. And as lawyers, that's part of what makes you all smart as lawyers, because we have the ability to make snap decisions and to decide things and reach conclusions on a dime. But sometimes those same things that causes us to be smart can also be impediments, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And so if you have not taken, and all of us have some biases, I know that I have some, and as a result of knowing that it's possible for me and everyone else to have some bias, I've taken a number of implicit association tests. And this implicit association test is not the end all to everything, but it is a valuable tool that you can use to understand whether you have a bias towards, against, or in favor of a particular group of people. So if you haven't taken any test, implicit association test, I would encourage you to do so. I'd also like to point out that in addition to implicit bias, I think that we should all understand, and we should be realistic in understanding that in addition to implicit biases in an organization, especially if you are in a large organization, there are going to be some people who have explicit biases. And so, you can't change the hearts and minds of everyone, but if you have some leadership at the top who is giving some direction, and also people in the middle who are supporting the leaders at the top, then you can have some change in your organization. One of the other barriers is privilege. A lot of times people think that they don't have a particular privilege. And I've had people to talk to me and say, I have not had privilege. I come from a hardworking family. I had to work my entire way through high school, college, law school, etc. So, please don't talk to me about having a privilege. One of the good things, which is why I say I remain an eternal optimist, is that, at our firm, Locke Lord, we engaged in the 21-day challenge, which I got the idea from the labor and employment section of the ABA, but we created different readings and offerings for people. And then after we did the 21-day challenge, we had town hall meetings, and they were really pleased with some of the people who actually said that, they really thought that they didn't have any privilege, and they really rejected the notion of white privilege because of their background. They were lower income, came from lower income working class families, and so had to work their way through everything, and did not believe that they could. But after reading and educating themselves more, which I can't emphasize enough, is that you've got to read more things. You've got to have an understanding so that you won't just take things at face value. After doing some of the readings, they understood the difference and that they did have privilege. And the fact that they were able to admit that, I thought was a major breakthrough. So, even if we think that everything is purely on merit, there are some people who have advantages over people, and that we should, have an understanding of that. And one thing, people don't understand, people talk about affirmative action and how people are, you talk about having race as a factor in admitting people. No one talks about the percentage of legacy children who get into college and into law schools and so forth. So, thinking about micro inequities, I refer to it as like little paper cuts. When people say things that are insulting, that are offensive, or do things that may seem small and you don't really want to talk about it, but it has a real serious impact on you that causes you not to really want to be yourself and really want to fully participate. And when you have somebody who's subjected to micro inequities, it causes them to either leave, it causes them not to perform at the highest level for which they are able to do, and there's a separation of employment. The other thing, especially with regard to hiring, I think that we don't expand enough, that we don't always look in all of the right places for really good and valuable talent. Especially in some of the larger law firms, we are all seeking the same 10% of the law school population from all of the same schools. And I think, I thought about another firm that I was with. The people in New York, they only wanted people from NYU. And sometimes when we would send people maybe from Seton Hall, what would happen is that people from Seton Hall, because they know that they're thought of as sort of less than, they're going to work harder to prove they've got something to prove. And so we should look at not just the law students who are graduating from the top 10 law schools and top 25 law schools, that we need to expand where we look for law students, because you can get good and valuable people from law schools. And sometimes when we hire people laterally from some of these law schools, we find that they can perform or outperform anyone who has gone to any of the top tier law schools. And so I think that that's one of the mistakes that we make when we are recruiting, as to we limit ourselves to where it is we're recruiting. So I would ask that you really look at that. So, I want us to look at, how it is we retain, what it is that we're doing, and what has occurred over time. And so, what was mentioned in my introduction is that I had the privilege of co-authoring the recent report, Left Out and Left Behind. And one of the things we looked at, I also had an opportunity to co-author a report, Visible and Visibility, Women of Color in Law Firms. And in 2006, that report indicated that 85% of women of color leave law firms within 5 years of being there. And it looked at the statistics of the fact that, about 2% of all equity partners are women of color. And so fast forward to 2020, and you're surveying and you're talking to, women, the ones who are left, and you find that some of the statistical information is exactly the same. About 2% of all equity partners are women of color. 14 years later, nothing has changed. And you look at Black women, for example, who are equity partners in law firm, and they are 0.75% of all equity partners. And so, what is causing this to be the case? And so when we talk to people, they talked about there's a belief that they're marginalized and that they're the recipients of negative stereotypes. They have a lack of access to clients and to business opportunities, and even to opportunities to interact with other partners and other lawyers throughout their organizations. They don't have good sponsors and mentors to help them to navigate just the politics of the organization, and to let them know that this is what you should be doing at this point in your career. This is what you should be doing at this point in your career. That it's not enough to just to keep your head down and do your work. You have to be noticed, and all of those different things that a good mentor and a good sponsor would do for you. And so, and then the other thing that has happened that unfortunately I've seen is that when you talk to law firms in particular, and they say, we can't keep our women of color because our clients are stealing them. And so, I am not one who readily accepts excuses for anything. I try not to make excuses myself for anything or any missteps that I make. But my thought is that you wouldn't lose these people. They wouldn't be looking in the first instance if you have created an environment that is inclusive, where they have a good sense of belonging. And so I think when they leave, or when they're thinking about leaving, you have to ask yourselves, why are they even considering leaving this organization? What is it that we have not provided that would cause them to look in the first instance? Yes, it could be a different opportunity. Yes, it could be more, they don't have to work 7 days a week, et cetera. But what if we believe in this talent, what is it that we could have done to cause them not to look in the first place or even be receptive to a different offer? And so I think that we have to take a hard look at some of the things that we do and maybe not make excuses. Obviously, we're not going to keep everyone. And some will say that we're losing white men and, et cetera, as well. But if you look at the percentages that you have in your law firm and you look at it from that standpoint, can you really afford to lose anyone who you have? And so, the other thing too is that people are skipping to different law firms. And so especially now, since there's a heightened awareness and a heightened desire of having our organizations look at, being more inclusive and being more diverse. And so, people are starting to poach and they're still looking at the same group of people as opposing to expanding who it is that they're looking at. And also, going back to the privilege issue, understanding that everybody is not in the same place at the same time, and that does not mean that they're not as smart or that they're not as capable of performing at very high levels. Because people come to a position at different stages. And so sometimes, I could have been born on third base, but somebody who came from a single parent home, first person, well, I didn't come from a single parent home, but I am the first person in my family to go to college, definitely to law school. But there are people who have been born into country clubs. There are people who have had parents and family members who are lawyers. And so they know the lingo, they know certain things. And so they're born on third base when somebody like me may have been born in the dugout. Doesn't mean that I can't catch up. But it means that we have to be patient and that we have to work with people if we're really interested in having a diverse and inclusive work environment. And when people see that we're receptive to that, then they're more willing to stay and they're more willing to come to your organization. People want to look at, when you're looking to hire, they want to dig deeper than what's on your website. What's the description of how you define your diversity and inclusion efforts? They want to dig deeper. And so, we have to think about, how we do that and who's there already. And sometimes I know for some of you, it's like a catch-22 situation. We don't have anybody. So who are we going to put out there to help to be a role model for others to come? And so, so you have really double duty. But I would urge you not to, when you do start hiring, people of color or people with more diverse backgrounds, that you don't overemphasize that we are so happy to have you, because that's going to also scare people away if you overemphasize that. So, be mindful of that. And so I want to just now give you a few tools because I've been talking a lot longer than I thought I was going to, and I'd like to leave some time for some questions. So, we think about some of the things that happen to diverse lawyers. One of the things I refer to as PIA. You have to prove it again, prove it again. And so you have to go above and beyond what everybody else does to obtain the same recognition and respect. And even if you do a good job one time, you have to start from scratch and prove yourselves over and over and over again. And so, I can tell you from personal experience that it has happened to me, and I have done really excellent work, and I've had people to come back and say, when I've had an internal referral, oh, the client really likes you. I'm like, well, of course they do. But in their minds, there is sometimes an expectation that because of who you are and because they have preconceived notions about what your capabilities are, they think that you can't actually do what it is that you know that you can do. And so I think that, as we're looking at people, that's why it's so important to educate ourselves over and over and over again, and to find out through a historical perspective why it is that people of color in particular have been so marginalized, because people have had low expectations of them for such a long period of time that those thoughts are ingrained in them without really understanding the history of people and how brilliant that they have, and how that brilliance has been pushed to the side and all of the other impacts. So I encourage you to do a lot of reading, a lot of understanding, a lot of listening to what is going on in your law firms. One of the things is that, another thing is that people have to walk a tightrope. Sometimes, you, especially during this time when there have been many conversations about what it's like, the stresses of coming to work and people not able to be their authentic selves when they arrive at the door of a big legal organization, that they don't want to show exactly who they are. And when you don't show exactly who you are, you necessarily can't do your absolute best work when you're not bringing your whole self to the organization. So I think that now in particular, we have to let that tightrope go as to what it is that we expect people to be like, that they don't have the same issues, especially now that they're not bringing these additional stresses, that it could be impacting their ability to do certain things when they may have to code switch and be one person when they're in the environment, the legal environment, and another person when they're not. So we have to think about that and think about, how it is that we look at performance levels and what it is that we can do to assist people who may have some extra stresses. And, can't help but talk about the maternal wall that's going on. And, especially what's going on now with COVID and people having to, do homeschooling and keep billable hours and to maintain things. And basically people are working 24/7. And so I think that, we have to really be mindful of that. And there's so many different perceptions, for men who may be listening, it was in the New York Times not long ago, and also Catalyst did a study as to, men really perceive that they are helping out during this time period, but still 90% of it is falling on women and on mothers. And so we have to make sure that they're getting all the necessary support that they need so that we can retain them. And that is without regard to what the color of or race of the employee is, or the woman is. But I will say that sometimes culturally, the stresses could be enhanced, because in some cultures, whereas some people have some help, they've got nannies and so forth, there are some cultures that really don't believe in nannies, that they believe that other children should not, outsiders should not be participating in the nurturing of their children. So we have to think about all of those things. So when we're thinking about hiring and retaining, I think that we always have to have some metrics. One of the ways that we can create some metrics is that we use some previous data. And as I mentioned early on, I think that sometimes we can't know where we need to go unless we know where it is that we've been. And so we have to look back at our past practices. And so it can be very time consuming. But sometimes, especially when we're looking to promote people so that they can stay with the organization, we have to look at people and put them side by side for the last 5 years, for the last 10 years, or however long those people have been there, and compare side to side and how we've been evaluating people and what kind of things are we using to evaluate people. And we need to check for consistencies. Are we evaluating Sharon the same way we're evaluating Tulu? do ratings fall if, for example, there have been some extenuating circumstances, or if people have children? You know, are they being evaluated differently? And then do the same performance ratings result in or have different results? So if a person, both groups of people are getting excellent results, is one person being promoted and the other one not? And then we have to look at individuals who are actually supervising, who are responsible, you know, the partner responsible for your career, and look at practice group leaders and department chairs, and ask them the hard questions of what it is that they're doing, and are they really comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, to find out what it is that we are actually doing. We have to look to see whether there are any patterns that have developed, and see whether, you know, if it's a particular partner, is he doing this the same thing to everyone in a particular group? Is he treating women all the same? Is he treating Latinx people the same? You know, are there any patterns that develop? And sometimes, because a lot of the biases are unconscious, we don't realize that we are developing practices and patterns that are detrimental to keeping and retaining diverse talent. And so, when we look and see whether there are deviations or their patterns of practices, you know, we have to go back and let people know that this is what we're seeing. You know, the HR people, the CDIO, whoever's reviewing this information, they have to be empowered to go back and to tell partners and to tell practice group here, this is what we're seeing, and we're seeing some deviations, and then determine whether we need to go back and look at it again. Do we need to do a do-over? And so, you know, sometimes we have to appoint bias interrupters in the evaluation process and in the hiring process to be able, someone who is able to recognize when somebody may be treated differently, or somebody is being asked a question that does not really relate to the position for which they are being considered, or they're being evaluated on something that has nothing to do with the actual position that they already hold. And so, are you looking at personality traits when you're evaluating someone, or are you looking at the actual performance level, or whether somebody is actually performing the job as they should be? And so, we want to continue to have formal performance reviews, but we want to look at the questions that we're asking people, so that if you have two associates basically doing the same thing, we want to be asking them the same questions. We want to be evaluating them the same way. We don't want to say this is a personality contest. Are both people doing the same type of work, and are they giving me the best quality of work? And am I looking at them the same way, or am I nitpicking one and not nitpicking the other? And sometimes it's really hard to confess that we're nitpicking, but if we take a deep, close look at what it is, sometimes that is the case. And so we have to be mindful of that. And when if we see ourselves slipping, then we have to repeat the process over and over and over again. And the same thing comes when it comes to hiring. You know, we have to make sure that whoever we're hiring, that we make sure that we're asking those questions that relate to the position and the duties of the position for which we're hiring the person. That if we're looking at several candidates, we have to make sure that we are asking all of the candidates the same questions, and that there is, sometimes there can be a follow-up question, but if you're not asking the same questions, or if you think you have some sort of connection with a particular person, you may become warm and friendly, and you may be willing to help someone with their answers. So for example, if you have a man interviewing a man, sometimes a person may be nervous and they could start stumbling with the questions, and you will stop them, say, take your time, etc. But then when a woman comes in, or a person of color comes in, and they stumble with their questions, you may go back and report that that person didn't do well in their interview. And it all comes back to these implicit biases that we have, and our natural tendency to gravitate towards those who we think are most like us. So we're going to give deference to people like that, but it's really important that if we're really going to advance, to try to put those things aside, understand what your biases may be so that you can put yourself in check and ask yourself, am I making this decision based upon the actual facts that I have gathered with regard to the situation? Or am I making determinations about things that I think that I know, or things that someone has told me about this person or about this particular demographic of people, rather than the actual facts? So we should always have a checklist in our minds, and maybe until we can get it straight, a checklist that we actually write down to make sure that, you know, we don't let our implicit biases creep into the decisions that they make. And so, you know, the other things, you know, that we can do, very solid things. So, you know, we can have sponsorship programs, mentorship programs, you know, have the leaders of your organization make a determination to be a mentor or sponsor to one of your diverse lawyers. And not just be a mentor, but, you know, be accountable in everything we do. You know, there has to be an accountability component to it. Otherwise, you know, if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get done. And treat it like any other goal or value in your firm with equal importance. Just like you know that you have a goal that you want to bill and collect $15 million a month, then you have the same kinds of goals when you set those goals, and you look to achieve it. No one says, you know, I'm not looking for an excuse as to why you didn't make this. Tell me, did you make this goal? Yes or no? And then you can explain later why you didn't make this particular goal. But you know that you will not be successful, for example, if you don't reach your financial goals. Likewise, you'll not be going to be successful if you don't reach your goals when it comes to hiring and retention. And ultimately, it's going to affect your bottom line. So what else can you do? So in the mentoring context, you know, ask yourself a question. You know, if you're in an organization, and one of the things that, you know, I've just done with our group is that on a quarterly basis, you know, ask the questions, you know, have the mentors and the sponsors say that I have met with my mentee this amount of time. I have gone over their personal and professional development plan this amount of times. I have looked at the benchmarks for where they should be at this point in their career. And I know that they're meeting their benchmarks. And if not, they're not meeting their benchmarks, I have gone to their practice group leader or their department head, and I have asked them what it is that's missing, what it is that they should be doing. Who have I, and then I ask myself, who have I introduced them to? And then I will meet with them, the diverse lawyers, because I think that rather than having an exit interview, you have a stay interview. So you want to make sure, you want to talk to people periodically, and this is not a part of the evaluation process. This is just so that you can understand that what it is that could be missing. Am I missing something that I'm not aware of that I'm missing? You know, are there any missteps? Is this, I want to really keep this person. Am I doing all that I can to make sure that this person stays? Does this person know that they're on partnership track? Does this person know what's necessary to even become a partner? And am I creating a space where they know that it's true? It's too late when the person decides that they're going to leave and say, oh, that person was so on partner track, and they were definitely going to become a partner. Well, if the person never knew because you have not had these constant communication with them, then it's no way to retrieve them at that time. And so I think it's really important that you have to be accountable at all levels. And so, you know, a lot of the ways that we can also do that is, you know, we can reach out, even if you don't have a formal mentor, you can reach out to people who are diverse in your firm. Ask them, are they getting what it is that they need? Can I introduce you to one of my clients? Can I introduce you to one of my internal clients? How are you doing with your business development? What tools do you need to help you to be successful? Because I know that if you're successful, I'm successful as well. And so, when we take those measures, there's not a lot of networking, in-person networking that's going on right now, but there's networking that's still going on, even over Zoom and other platforms. So, and I think that what we can do on an individual basis is that we can be really clear that diversity and inclusion is important to us, and that it is, and I am going to demonstrate to you why it's important to me. And then as an organization, whoever is the lead of the firm, they have to constantly give the message about diversity and inclusion. When you have your partner meeting, something about diversity and inclusion, because it doesn't stay with us long, it should be brought up at least every other monthly partner meeting, so that it can be ingrained in people and so that they understand what it means, so that people will believe, the people who are there will believe what it is that you're saying and not doubt you when you say that diversity and inclusion is a core value of your organization. And so, when you reach out to people on a regular basis and you let them know that they are valued, and you let them know that they're valued by listening as opposed to hearing what it is that they have to say, then you're more likely to be able to retain people. So, to just reiterate, I would think about, expanding who it is who you surround yourself with. Are you getting all of the information and all of perspectives that you need in order to make the best decisions and in order to keep the people who you really value and who are valuable to your organization? And then think about and read and study, and there's so many resources that are available to everyone to have an understanding of what it is that has occurred in our past, how it is that we got here, the structures that have been created that informs us and it guides us to create these barriers, to not being more inclusive and to having certain perceptions of people that we should not have. And so, there are many things. I would recommend that everybody read the 1619 project that came out in 2019 that Hannah Nora Jones did for the New York Times. It is extremely informative. And it's been so well received that people are actually stealing the New York Times off of the streets. And so, a lot of it has to do with race and racism. And, we need to learn how to be anti-racist as opposed to not just being a racist. And I think that it's easier for us to talk about things like this. It was a very, very uncomfortable, and for a lot of people, it's still very uncomfortable for us to talk about issues of race and so forth. But until we can talk about things that are uncomfortable for us and to us, then it's going to be hard to penetrate the barriers and get to where it is that we want to be. So with that, I think that it is actually 6:57, but I'll stay longer than 7 o'clock if there's some questions, and I could really talk a little bit more. So if you can show the last slide, Brandon. So change is mandatory for extraordinary results. And I think at this point, what we are looking for are extraordinary results. And there's no reason, in my opinion, that we can't turn the coal into diamonds and make our organizations much better than they are. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Paulette. You covered so much, and I think it's just demonstrative of the fact that this is a structural problem, as you said, which requires strategic and structural solutions. So I will quickly get to our questions. We had a couple. A couple of people kind of asked the same question, and it actually reminded me of something that came up in the media recently. So recently, the CEO of Wells Fargo blamed the shortage of Black talent in the bank on a lack of talented Black people to recruit from. So he said, while it might sound like an excuse, the reality is there's a very limited pool of Black talent to recruit from. He subsequently apologized for that comment, but that is something we often hear amongst law firms when they are recruiting. So folks have asked, one, as an outside recruiter, this person is constrained by the limited credentials firms will consider. How can we get around this? And then another person asked, if we only measure based on being on law journals and the best grade, we're limited as recruiters. So what thoughts do you have on other recruiting measures that get away from this narrative that there is limited Black talent or talent from people of color who are students?
Okay. So I would tell them to go back, tell the firms to go back and look at their records and see whether they are holding other people to the same standard. And more than likely they are not. So often people think that people of color, for example, are given a preference when that could not be further from the truth. People want people of color to be almost overly qualified. So I would, as a recruiter, say that I know that I am your client, but I want to do the absolute best job for you. And I would ask that you go back and you look at other people who you have hired, especially on a lateral basis, and tell me whether all of them have been in the top 10% of their class, whether all of them have been on law review. And in fact, how about you? Where did you go to law school? What were your grades? Were you in the top 10%? And why are you holding people of color to a higher standard than you would other individuals? I know that it's a hard task, but then I would give them examples of people who have achieved, really high, who have not gone to these schools and who have not been on law review. And I will tell you that I consider myself as a very high achiever. I went to Seton Hall, which was clearly not at the time that I graduated, was not in anybody's top tier law school. It's ranked much better now than it was when I went to school. I was not on law review because furthermore, they didn't have Black people on law review when I went to law school. But I think that, and there are plenty of people who are like me, who are high achievers, who are able to do well. And I think that recruiters have to work jointly with law firms, and law firms also, they should actually be informing their recruiters that, we want you to bring us more diverse people, and we are open and receptive to people who have not gone to these schools, because we are looking at our history and we're looking at all of our demographics, and we are finding that it's not necessary to go to those law schools and to be on law review to be high achievers. So, I think that law firms should actually be letting recruiters know that too.
Great. So our next question kind of takes it away from firms to the government sector. Which I think there's this perception that nonprofit and government agencies don't have similar issues as firms when we know they do.
Right.
So how would you suggest that those who are in the government sector recruit when those salaries can't necessarily compete with law firm salaries? Also, within the same question is, how would you suggest retaining attorneys of color in in-house environments as well? So government and in-house.
Okay, so first I'll talk about government because, and then I'll talk about in-house. So with respect to government, it depends on, first of all, there's a myth that there are so many positions available in big law firms. So I think that, that's, no offense, Dean, but I think that, one of the things law schools should not focus so much on is people going into big law firms, big big having a definition of whatever big is in your location. But I think that you know, there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of learning opportunities for people to go and work in government. And then also, you know, it's not that, you know, I think that there is a notion that needs to be dispelled, that people who work in government don't work as hard as people who work in law firms. And sometimes they are considered less than. But I think that the quality of work that they can get in working with government, especially different types of experiences that they can get, and can get them faster when they work in government than they do perhaps in a large law firm, and especially in a large law firm. You know, the same thing applies with regard to getting people to stay. You know, sometimes, you know, just because a person is in government does not mean that they have biases, don't have biases, including in the public defender's office. You know, there are biases no matter where you go. And so, you know, sometimes people think that they're in a traditionally good environment, that they are exempt from those types of barriers and so forth, but they're not. And so they need to do the same types of things, look inward, and look at themselves to see what they're doing to keep people from advancing. Because even when you look at government, you know, people, especially people of color, they don't hold the higher level positions that other people hold. And so, you know, what is causing them not to be promoted in the same way as other people? And so I think that you need to look at the same things. Who are you mentoring? You know, what are you demonstrating to the outside world, that this is a welcoming environment to come to the government, that there's certain skills that you can learn that you're not going to learn anywhere else. And, you know, and you could get a pension where you probably can't get one somewhere else. So there are benefits of working in different environments. It depends on what you are best suited to do or what makes you happy. And I think that people, when they take a position, especially for the long term, they should be happy in what it is that they're doing. They should be happy in the environment in which they're working, because if they're not going to stay, and you shouldn't stay. And so in-house is the other part of the question. So I think that in-house, you know, it's the same thing that relates to law firms and other legal environments. I think that you have to put the work in if you want somebody to stay, that if you want somebody to be included in your organization and feel like they're included. You know, a lot of times people say, I hear what you're saying, but it's time to go beyond hearing, and we have to really listen to what it is that people are saying. I think that we have to come to an understanding that, you know, being good and being diverse are not mutually exclusive things. And in fact, it's the opposite. In order to be good, we must be diverse and inclusive. And I think that when people can get past some of these barriers, and I think that, again, if I can harken back to the educational piece and having an understanding of how people were treated and how it has affected your kind of thinking and how it is you believe that you should treat certain people, can help to change the way you think and the way you do things. But there has to be a willingness to educate ourselves and go back and look and see what the full history is, so that we can have an understanding of why it is that we think this way, and why it is that we think that certain people can't achieve as much, and why we think that certain other people can achieve more. But if we don't understand the history, it's going to be difficult to move forward.
Okay, let's move on to our next question since we are up against time. So this next question implicates the Mansfield rule. And
Okay.
so for those who don't know, the Mansfield rule certification measures whether law firms have affirmatively considered at least 30% women, attorneys of color, LGBTQ plus attorneys, and lawyers with disabilities for leadership and governance roles, equity partner promotions, formal client pitch opportunities, and senior lateral positions. So this questioner asked, do you think that it's advisable that all law firms adopt the Mansfield rule for all hiring?
So let me just do a slight correction. It's 30% of 70% of people who are considered, right? It's not 30% of 100%. And you know, one thing that I will tell you, I'm on the advisory committee of Mansfield, and one of the things that I said, they keep adding groups who are covered by Mansfield, but they're not increasing the requirements. So even though they've added LGBTQ, it's still 30%. Then they added disability, it's still 30%. So I think that that's one of the things that they're going to look at. But one of the things that I found in doing this, the other thing is that it does not apply to every practice group in the firm when it comes to pitches and RFPs and so forth. You can really select only one or two to actually comply with the Mansfield rules. So you can have 7 or 8 departments in your firm, and all of them can remain the same way. But what happens, I think, with regard to Mansfield, it causes people to start thinking about it. And I think that that's a good thing. So I know that in our firm that you know, even people who are not in practice groups that we report on, they're asking themselves this question: have I considered this one? Have I considered the other for this particular pitch or for staffing this particular matter? So I think that it is good in the sense that it's causing us to think about other people who we may not have ordinarily thought about. And it's also causing us to look at, if I am in this particular practice group, what diverse people do I have to call upon to help me to do this? And then on the flip side of that, clients they're not really looking to see which practice group you have that you're reporting on for Mansfield purposes. If it's their practice group, they want you Mansfield compliant. So I think that, you know, in a way, you know, whereas there can be improvements to the Mansfield requirements, I think that it's starting to get people to think in different ways. And if I might add a little self-promotion, which one of the things that, you know, I think that firms can do, because women of color in particular and other people of color and women, they don't like to engage in self-promotion, but I'm going to do a little bit of self-promotion right here, is that one of the resolutions which I got through as president is Resolution 113, which a lot of general counsels have adopted, and what that resolution has also done a lot to get people to have more diverse lawyers, more diverse people working on their matters, because companies are being more serious about it. General counsels have signed on to it. There's an accountability tool for it. They have to do a model diversity survey to actually report on what they're doing. And general counsels, HP is an example. If you're not having diverse teams, we're taking 10%, we're not paying you 10% of your bill. So, you know, so people are creating different analytics using that. And so, you know, different tools. And so clients are really paying attention to these things because they know that they're getting better results. You know, the demographics are changing. It's just for so many reasons why it's so crucial. And, you know, I believe that firms are going to be, they're going to be dinosaurs if they don't, you know, change the demographics of their firm. And so how do we get to these people? It's not an excuse. So we have to start building a pipeline. We have to see who's going to law school, who's staying in law school, what tools are we giving people once they get in law school to ensure that they're going to be successful after they get out of law school. So we have to start building a pipeline. And to Wells Fargo, you know, when people tell me that they can't find somebody, I say, you're not looking hard enough. You've got to look harder than you're looking, because, you know, when people can find people to go to school in the cornfields of Indiana or in the rural areas of Iowa, which Iowa is considered a flyover state, you can find people. Just like people find their way to go to the school in Buffalo. You know, not to say that anything's wrong with Buffalo, but people from Manhattan may think so. Or people who are in DC at a law firm, you know, why would I go there? But you get good quality people who go to Buffalo Law School. So, you know, so quality can be found just about anywhere. You've got to look harder. You got to dig deeper. If this is something you're really interested in, you can make it happen, just like you fulfill any other goal that you have.
Thank you for that. To be respectful of everyone's time, I'm just going to ask one last question, and I think this is a good one to wrap this up with. It's actually two questions in once, and if I didn't get to your question, I apologize. I used the first in time rule and just went with who got to me first. So you mentioned that firms need to take a long-term approach to addressing diversity and inclusion. What are some permanent structures that firms can put in place to make sure that the emphasis on diversity and inclusion is not moved to the back burner after this movement and moment ends? In conjunction with that, in setting up these permanent structures, how do we then translate that to building a culture that allows employees of color to be their full selves at work?
So you're not paying me enough money to and so you're asking me for secret sauce. So so there are some things that can be done, but there is no one secret sauce to doing this. I think that if you do certain things and that become a part of the firm's overall strategic plan, that it is something like everything else is measured in the strategic plan, that this is a part of the strategic plan of something that is measured. That you fully have your executive committee, your management committee, whatever it is that you say, but it's written down. And this is what we're going to do. This is one of the things that we are going to be measured by, and that there are going to be consequences that if you don't do it. And so I think that when there are no consequences, whether the consequence is a carrot or a stick, that it's not likely that it's going to be done. So I think that you have to have built-in consequences as to what's going to happen if you perform well in this particular area or if you don't. And I think that is one of the biggest drivers that's going to cause people to do things. You know, you can ask the in-house lawyers at Microsoft, for example, when Brad Smith said, you know, I want you to hire more diverse teams. And if you don't, I'm going to withhold your bonus. And so they didn't really believe him, and bonuses got withheld. And so it didn't happen again because the people wanted their bonuses. And so I think that if you don't build those kinds of structures in, that you say you're going to do something and then mean what you say. I think that that we can't, you know, I think that the education, I can't emphasize that enough, must be an ongoing process, that we have to continue to have conversations, that we have to not be afraid to talk to our lawyers of color, our Black lawyers, and listen to what it is that they have to say so that they can become comfortable. You know, you cannot put yourselves, you know, I don't think that a person should ever think that they can put yourselves in the shoes of a Black person or a person of color. You can empathize with them, but you can't put yourself in their shoes. And so I think that there has to be that understanding, and has to be that understanding that we may think this way from this perspective, or from a completely different perspective. That doesn't mean that we can't get to the same result. And so I think that we have to build into our evaluation process and have it written down. This is how we're going to evaluate everyone going forward. And these are the standards that we're going to use, that we cannot deviate from these standards. The same thing, everybody who's on the hiring committee knows that these are the standards, the rules that we use. Everything else that goes into all the other policies that we do, because if it's not written down, it's not going to happen. If there's no accountability, it's not going to happen. If people are not rewarded or punished, it's not going to happen. And these things have to be clearly articulated. And once people start doing them, it will ultimately become a part of the culture. And I don't necessarily believe, I think that there's certain things that we should do now that we don't have time for long term, especially I don't have time. I've been practicing for 44 years. And so, you know, I know that Rome wasn't built in a day, but there's some things that we can do right now that can make a difference in the environment and the way people perceive us.
Thank you so much. You've certainly given us so much food for thought, but you've also given us concrete, practical solutions, which I think that is what attorneys want from these talks. So I just thank you so much for your words of wisdom tonight. And I'm sure I can say on behalf of everyone who joined, your words were very helpful. I'm just gonna throw it back to Ann Joint, the president of the Law Alumni Association, for quick closing remarks.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful remarks. I think you've given us a whole lot to think about and a whole lot to work towards as we try to do our best to make our profession more equitable across the board. And thank you for your time. I know you're very much in demand. I think you said you have 14 of these between the middle of November. So we appreciate your thoughtfulness, and thank you to everybody for joining us and for the co-sponsorship of the Bar Association, the Women's Bar, and the Minority Bar. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Good night,
And on
everybody.
behalf of the
Bye-bye.
University of Buffalo School of Law, thank you so much. We are New York State's public law school. So everybody feel free to follow up with us again. Thank you again, Paulette. Very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for
Bye.
your hard work. Thank you, Tola. Thank you, everybody.